This episode of the Paddock Pass Podcast is brought to you by Renthal Street Clip-On Handlebars, premium race-spec clip-ons developed by some of the world's fastest riders.
Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass Podcast, brought to you by Renthal Street. Check out renthal.com for chains, sprockets and lots of other parts for your motorcycle. On today's podcast, we've got a gap in MotoGP race weekends, and we've got a good gap filler on this week's pod. We've got the chance to sit down with Claudio Domenicali from Ducati, and Adam and David went out to see him in Italy only a couple of weeks ago. So Adam, I'm going to come straight to you, Mr. 2 Sundays in a week with MXGP and MotoGP. What's going to happen this weekend? There's no racing for you.
I'm not too sure what I'm going to do, Steve, to be honest. I'm sure my family will be glad to have my undivided attention, and it's coming to the end of the football and basketball seasons for my kids, so that will be the plan, I think. But there's still things going on, isn't there, in the racing world, and whether it's kind of injuries or contract signatures or whatever else, there's still plenty to talk about, and we'll set the scene for our interview with Ducati CEO Claudio Domenicali as well, Steve. Like you said, Dave and I were over in Bologna. We did that I think it was after Portimao, wasn't it, Dave? The first Grand Prix of the season. Yeah, so we managed to quickly jump on a plane from Portugal to Italy, and it was great because we had a tour of the factory as well, but we'll explain more about that in a minute.
Obviously, I've mentioned that Adam works 2 Sundays a week usually. Dave, there is actually 2 9 o'clocks on each day. But you're up a little bit earlier than usual today to get yourself ready for the pod. But Adam mentioned there about the trip to Bologna. The Ducati factory is a pretty cool trip as well, actually. And there's a lot that's there for fans as well, the museum and different things.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in Bologna, well, first of all, Bologna is just a fantastic city to visit anyway. If you like your food, then it's, I think it's generally regarded as like the centre of Italian cuisine. And I have always eaten exceptionally well there, so there's a good reason to go, even if you're not a bike fan. The Ducati Museum is really interesting. The tour is really interesting as well. Just seeing how they actually build a motorcycle, the process that goes into it and all the rest of it. So, yeah, really enjoyed it.
They still let Dave into Italy and into Bologna despite his discrimination against certain Italian desserts. So I didn't bring it up actually while we were at Ducati because I didn't want people to think negatively of him.
Negatively of you, Ad. Let's be honest about this. You would have been guilty by association there as well. Neil Morrison joined us on the pod as usual again. And Neil, the last time I saw you, you were just about to tuck into a massive bag of onion bhaji on a train to Belfast.
Exactly, Steve. I had a weekend back in Northern Ireland, stopped off in Dublin along the way and met up with yourself, which was the first meeting in, a week? We've had a bit of brotherly bonding overload in the last couple of weeks with Superbikes in Catalonia and a trip to Dublin. So, yeah, very pleasant indeed. And, like Ad, looking ahead at the week ahead with a free weekend and plotting what to do.
Lots to think about, but we got lots to talk about on the pod as well today. And let's go straight into Ducati. Obviously, this is effectively a Ducati special with the Domenicali interview, but not so special for Ducati's lead rider, Neil, with the news that Pecco Bagnaia has a bit of an injury going into the Italian Grand Prix.
Yeah, exactly, Steve. I don't think it's anything massively serious. Ducati were certainly trying to play it down when they released some news on Sunday. We're recording on Monday. So they sent out an update yesterday. They said that he was suffering some pain in his right ankle after that crash with Maverick Vinales at Le Mans. Initially, didn't think it was anything, but went away and had some tests, and they found a small partial fracture in the talus bone in the ankle, which can be quite nasty. They say that they're absolutely sure that it won't prevent Pecco from participating at Mugello the second weekend in June, which is about 3 weeks away. So yeah, he's going to be spending the next couple of weeks trying to recover from that. But yeah, quite a nasty little injury. I remember a partial fracture to that bone. Maybe doesn't sound so serious, but yeah, that's obviously the right ankle has a lot to do. So yeah, Pecco will be hoping that heals up quicker than as quick as possible.
He has got a long time to recover. If it was a fracture in the talus, it will heal. It is manageable. It's just it's more likely to hamper his training than anything else. I think he's likely to be fit, certainly easily able to ride. And of course, Ducati at Mugello, they have a reasonable record there, I would say. So I would say that there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to actually score a good result. It's going to be very, very important to have a good result there, not just for his championship, but also because it's Ducati, because it's his home race. The Ducati goes well around there, so it should be an interesting weekend.
Adam, obviously, just to go back to the Domenicali interview that we'll have at the end of the show after the break, what was your big takeaways from sitting down with him?
First of all, Steve, two things about Bagnaia. Firstly, I think it's a reminder that, even when these guys have a relatively slow speed crash, I guess you could say, I mean, it was still a big impact with Viñales in Le Mans. They're carrying sort of physical problems all the time. I mean, we saw Bagnaia come back on the scooter with Viñales, and also going to the pit box, everything seemed fine. I think it is a reminder to race fans that these guys carry sort of, if not the scars, then certainly the bumps and bruises, well after sort of impacts in motorcycle racing. The safety aspect of MotoGP now is so good, and you see how well the leathers and the helmets and everything else perform that you tend to forget that, these guys actually get really bashed around. So I think it's important to remember that. And secondly, what do we think about, the furore surrounding Bagnaia and those comments about, the inequality needed again in race machinery in MotoGP? I had some sympathy with him. He said his comments were taken out of context. It was slightly unusual to see the series promoters kind of pushing the angle. You can imagine Ducati top brass were probably not too amused to see their rider at the subject of a bit of an internet whirlwind. But I did have some sympathy with Bagnaia because, I think we want the racers to be able to express opinions. We want them to be able to, not worry about having their comments sliced and presented in, various media formats, as, it happens in most sports these days. I think Bagnaia was slightly harshly done by there just for having an opinion on the current state of MotoGP.
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where, like you said, we want our riders and our athletes to express themselves, but also the last thing that anyone wants them to do is to actually express themselves, because then there's the chance just to knock them down, and that's where there's the balance that's needed. I think Pecco's comments, they weren't that bad in a lot of ways, but it's also a case of this is the MotoGP life that everyone has to lead now. Everything is close. If you're on a satellite bike, an independent bike, you've still got a chance of winning races. We've seen that this year. That wasn't the case 5-10 years ago. It was always the case of just the factory riders able to win races, and the cream gets the top. So a Pecco Bagnaia, a world champion, a Quartararo, Marquez, whoever it was, would always end up on the factory seats. But it would be a case of you were then up against the other factory riders to try and win a race and challenge for a championship. Now you have to think about 15 other riders. I would have been interested if Pecco was so concerned about the safety elements if he was still on the Pramac bike and it was a half second off the pace. But I thought that, like you said, like with the sheer size of the storm that came from it, Hervé Poncharal discussing it as well, it probably was just a storm in a teacup that just got completely overblown.
I think it was certain comments presented in a certain light to Hervé Poncharal, which was always going to create a reaction, and from there it all sort of spiraled out of control. I think it was also a little bit of Pecco explaining him or not explaining himself as clearly as he might in Italian, because it did come from his Italian debrief. In his English debrief, he said something similar, but he didn't say that, look, we need this advantage. He was much clearer about it being, look, it's just the way it is. We used to have an advantage, but we don't have the advantage anymore. But the reason for this is really quite simple. The reason is we have ride height device, especially the ride height devices, aerodynamics to a larger degree as well. It makes it much, much more difficult to overtake, and that has created a massive problem in terms of passing. It's putting all of the pressure on those first few laps. So basically, the more pressure there is on those sort of first 3 or 4 laps, the more likely there's going to be crashes and accident. You can't sit there and bide your time and wait.
I mean, just to explain to the listeners about media debriefs, I mean, sometimes they can be quite intimate. You know, you'll have a rider talking to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 journalists. Other times you'll have, say, like the case with Fabio Quartararo in Le Mans, you'll have 20 to 30 people trying to squeeze around a table to hear what he has to say. This year, there have been a couple of riders who have been filmed. Alessio Spargaro, Bagnaia, Quartararo, Jack Miller, just to name a couple who I think have been followed by TV cameras when they come to these sort of debrief sessions. And, you know, I think if media, or certainly, you know, Dorna, the series promoters, are going to start putting, you know, kind of the comments that emerge from these little sessions on social media, then, you know, you have to look to the kind of exposition that Quartararo gave in Le Mans, where he basically said Yamaha were fucked. You know, that there was no discernible positive attributes to the current guys of the M1, and he was struggling. I mean, if you put that up there, then that's a really bad look for, you know, Yamaha, the team, the company, and, you know, but it's also juicy content, I guess you could say. So where do you draw the line? Because this observation that Bagnaia gave of current MotoGP was interesting. I mean, it's interesting that because he's the world champion. It's interesting because he's probably the pace setter, as we know. But then there's also a lot of other stuff. I mean, Alessio Spargaro, guys, as we know, is somebody who's particularly vocal, always has an opinion on something. You know, I think the debriefs could be mined for this kind of like sensationalism. And do we want to see it?
Yeah, I mean, the point is that media debriefs, I mean, they take lots of different forms, but usually there's sort of like a coherent narrative. Questions they'll often be sort of follow-on questions. You know, so one journalist will ask one question, and another journalist will sort of listen to that, think of something, and think, well, what about this? And so you get a much more coherent picture for it, which is what, you know, like the job of a journalist is to explain what's going on. Whereas what seems to be happening is we are just, you know, getting the quote and turning it into clickbait, which is, you know, it's always happened. It's what people go for. People read the headlines rather than the articles, and it's much easier to sell with those sort of things. But I would say that the real irony I found behind the whole thing is about Pecco complaining, Pecco saying, you know, there used to be the advantage that the factory bikes and the other bikes hadn't, is that one of the reasons that the racing is also close is because of all of the technical innovations which Ducati have bought. You know, like Ducati have bought these ride high devices. They were the first with the ride high devices. They were the first to really dive into and explore the advantages that aerodynamics have. And so it's sort of, Ducati have created the problem that Pecco is suffering from.
Yeah, and I think it's always interesting, David, like you mentioned there about the developments Ducati made. That's always been the case, but whenever you've got 8 bikes out in the grid, all at that high level, it just creates this field that we have now, and it puts everyone under a lot of pressure. Just to go back, though, to the debriefs, I always think it's quite interesting that in the past, like whenever I first arrived into the paddock, there was never anything that would be recorded from a debrief that wasn't for print media. And then that all changed after Sepang 2015, when we suddenly had all of the debriefs being recorded, relayed live by Dorna, and then that's happened a little bit on a few other occasions, and now they're just trying to edge into that. And it's a very dangerous one, because I always look at it that, obviously, like whenever I'm in a World Superbike race, I'm there working for Dorna, and I've got my job to do. But I also look at it that Gordo is there to do his job. He spends a lot of money to make sure that he gets to all the rounds. And we get the benefit of that because we get his insight in the podcast, and his readers get the benefit of that because he's the one that's boots on the ground for pretty much every round in World Superbikes for the last 25 years. But suddenly, if, you know, it could be the Bautista press conference in Barcelona, it was only to announce he was signing a 1-year contract. But if those kind of things are broadcast, suddenly Gordo loses some of what makes him unique in the paddock. And that's the slippery slope that you have to kind of tread on. And it's a big challenge because, like Adam said, you're looking for the juicy content, and then you're also trying to make sure that you're able to grow the series. And you grow the series with content that comes from Moto Matters or On Track Off Road, or, you know, the magazines Neil works for, because suddenly it's organic content that is needed for it. So it's a tough balancing for that. But just to move on to probably the next biggest news that we have in racing, Toprak Razgatlioglu has announced that he's going to leave Yamaha and go to BMW. We actually talked about it on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, myself and Gordo, but I'm quite curious to see what you guys think of it, because Toprak going to BMW on the surface looks like the biggest mistake a rider could make. So I'm quite curious to see what the three of you think of it. Obviously, there was talk that Toprak could move to MotoGP potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting change of heart, because Toprak, I think, gave an interview about a month ago to Speedweek, the German website, in which he said that his goal for next year was to go to MotoGP. Yamaha obviously organised a test for him at Jerez when he was riding alongside Kyle Crutchlow over 2 days. But it quickly became clear, I think, at the American Grand Prix, or the Grand Prix of the Americas, that Yamaha didn't see Toprak in their MotoGP plans for 2024. They weren't explicitly saying that, but they were reading between the lines. It was clear that they felt his lap times weren't strong enough to warrant an immediate switch across to the MotoGP paddock. Now, speaking to you, Steve, you're obviously speaking to people in the World Superbike paddock. It sounds like Toprak didn't have all the tools at his disposal to make that MotoGP test a total success. And you just wonder whether that has maybe had a slight impact on his decision to move to BMW and World Superbike. I saw Andrea Dossoli from Yamaha's World Superbike program yesterday saying that they had made a really competitive offer for Toprak, and it is believed that he will be getting a sizable increase in wage from BMW. But yeah, I find it quite strange, just because you've seen Michael van der Mark and Scott Redding in recent years move from Yamaha and Ducati, really competitive rides, to BMW and just really struggling. I know Redding had a little bit of success with BMW last year, a couple of podiums, a couple of decent rides. Van der Mark had a win in 2021. But it's, I have to say it's quite a puzzling one. And you do wonder whether the checkbook is really what convinced him to make that move.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Neil. I think, the wages has to be a big part of it. Toprak, we're not talking about a 21, 22-year-old racer, kind of really in the spring of his career as well. Perhaps he's just decided he wants to make some money. I thought it was interesting as well in his quote where he said he had an offer to go to MotoGP. I wonder sort of what avenue or opportunity that was. I mean, as we've discussed on the podcast before, riding an M1 or racing an M1 in MotoGP at the moment doesn't look that appealing. Frankie Morbidelli, I think there's a big question mark over his future. Fabio Quartararo is one of, if not the most talented rider aside from Marc Marquez in MotoGP, and what kind of situation is he finding himself in at the moment? Dave, I know on various occasions you've said to people that BMW do not go MotoGP racing because they get the required exposure from sort of bare minimum investment, really. I mean, they're involved in MotoGP when it comes to safety cars and various other models. But you have to wonder if Toprak goes there and, bombs or, kind of sort of fades away like we've seen several high profile riders done, the names of which Steve has mentioned. I mean, surely this is kind of negative PR for BMW, isn't it?
Well, yes, but the popularity of the World Superbike Series is much less than the popularity of the MotoGP Series. So it's a safer place to bomb, if you like. And certainly at the moment, the BMW Superbike program seems to be the most efficient way to turn money into disappointment. But
I'd say it's Honda's actually the most efficient way.
Oh, but possibly. But it's a tightly fought race. Yeah, I mean, like in terms of BMW going to MotoGP, for BMW to go to MotoGP, they'd have to spend something in the region of 30 million a year for a year, maybe two before they even entered the series. Then they'd need to spend 50 million a year, at least 50 every year. And I would be willing to bet that that their sponsorship is a lot less than 50 or 60 million a year for the safety cars and the BMW M Award and all the rest of the stuff which they get. I mean, because before every race you see two BMW BMW cars and a BMW bike lined up on the grid at the front of the grid. It's all over the place. There's BMW signage all around the circuits, and there is the BMW VIP sort of hospitality thing where they invite guests in. So they're getting a lot of return from that, and I think they would be getting much more return from that than from actually trying to race and running around in a bit like KTM did in the first couple of seasons. Running around desperately hoping to get into the top 15, especially right now. With how close the front of the field is, I think it'd be very, very, very difficult. As far as Toprak is concerned, I would have been interested to see Toprak on a KTM or even a Honda, because I think that bike would have suited him much, much more. It would have suited his riding style a lot better. But his riding style was absolutely not suitable to the Yamaha M1. The way of braking, the way of carrying the corner speed, all the rest of it. What he wants to do is get the thing on its nose into the corner and then come out again. And the Yamaha was just absolutely antithetical to the way that he rides a motorbike.
Yeah, I think just to go back to the Jerez test, Neil mentioned it, and we saw in the aftermath of that Yamaha didn't basically build a bike that was capable of housing a 6 foot tall rider. So Toprak wasn't comfortable on the bike. So he went to that test and immediately saw that he wasn't going to get, in his eyes, a fair crack at it. And it reminded me at the time, and I said it at the time, it reminded me a lot of when he went to the Suzuka test for Kawasaki. Everyone talks about him not racing the Kawasaki at Suzuka, and that's what made up his mind to leave Kawasaki. The decision had already been made, because on the Sunday morning in Suzuka, he signed his contract with Yamaha. He had already seen that he had been disrespected at a test when Jonathan Rea, and I think it was Leon Haslam was his teammate that year. It was Haslam and Rea were the number 1 and 2, and Toprak was very firmly the number 3 rider, and he couldn't understand or accept that. And that was the real reason, the root of the reason why he left Kawasaki. Obviously, the 8 hours not racing then was a final nail in the coffin, but the deal was already done before that. Toprak's a very sensitive rider that needs to feel that he's loved, needs to feel that he's the number 1. And I think that after the MotoGP test, he suddenly saw that maybe he's the number 1 in the eyes of Andrea Dossoli or whoever else, but not in the eyes of Yamaha. And that's why a new challenge, a new opportunity was something he wanted to look at. And then whenever and it was a Brinks truck from Munich that's been dropped over to Turkey firm, that definitely turned his head. And we were talking about it in the Catalan show and on the Catalan TV broadcast about the fact that suddenly that weekend Toprak was very aware of the money that was on the table. And it's money that you may not win back if you were to sign for another contract. So it's a business decision as much as anything else. Toprak's managed by Keenan, and Keenan was always one of the highest paid riders in the Superbike paddock, even when he was just a Supersport rider. So Toprak has seen the wealth that Keenan has, and you'd have to then think, you know what, I'm as good as Keenan, or I'm better than Keenan, I've won a Superbike championship. I want a piece of that. I want the big house. I want the flash cars. And, it's natural for that to become part of your decision-making process. I also think that with the BMW, everyone will talk about it's going to be very difficult for him to win on it. It is going to be difficult to win on it. But when he moved to Yamaha, everyone said he can't win on the Yamaha. It doesn't suit his riding style. And he was able to win first time out. Toprak's a very talented rider. If he's able to bring Phil Marin across with him, if he's able to bring the team around him that he needs, he can make that BMW successful as well.
It's interesting what you were saying there, Steve. Also, I think it's interesting where this leaves Yamaha for their second MotoGP seat, because obviously Toprak was never realistically in the running, despite him making it known that he was kind of interested in moving across to MotoGP. A couple of weeks ago, it was fair to assume that Yamaha would just turn their attentions to Jorge Martin, but Paolo Ciabatti from Ducati made a pretty outspoken comment in Le Mans where he said he was fairly sure that Yamaha can't offer the kind of competitive package that Ducati can at the moment, and that's absolutely right. Why, if you're Martin, why would you switch when you're basically on the same bike as the reigning world champion in a good team? why would you switch that for Yamaha, where they're kind of in a world of pain, and they've had significant issues with their second rider? I guess you could also say Yamaha would look at Bezzecchi. But again, if you were to believe, there was a good report in the Gazzetta dello Sport during the French Grand Prix from Paolo Ianneri, where he was saying that Ducati's plan to keep Bezzecchi on the books is to promote him up to Pramac. So it would be Martin and Bezzecchi there next year. And again, a similar argument could be made for Bezzecchi, in that why would you switch a race-winning package, which currently is taking you to the championship fight, for a real unknown package, Yamaha. Now, Yamaha surely are only going to get better as the year goes on, but I think the argument stands. And if you kind of rule Martin and Bezzecchi out, Toprak is gone to BMW. Who's left? I mean, do you start looking at Moto2? Do you keep Franco Morbidelli? I mean, it's less kind of clear cut. There's less of a very obvious signing that can be made there.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting for me, Neil, is that one of the big things that we're hearing in the Superbike paddock is that Digi is looking to move across to Superbikes, and that's obviously because Gresini hasn't worked out for him. It's been a tough time for him. It looks like Arbolino is going to move up to MotoGP, probably with Gresini, but suddenly, if you're Yamaha and Martin doesn't want to go to that bike, or you're not able to bring in a rider, maybe you try and bring in Arbolino and you make him a factory rider, you make him well paid, and then you've got Quartararo and Arbo as your two riders. That could be an option. It's like I'm obviously looking at it from the outside of what we're hearing in the Superbike paddock about who wants to come over to Superbikes, but that seems to be one of the chips falling into place.
Does it also have implications for Yamaha's Superbike team? I mean, if they lose their former world champion, what kind of high-level replacement do they have for him? And also, coming back to BMW, as we know, there are 2 slots on the grid. I just wonder, would Dorna be pursuing the German brand even more aggressively if they weren't already a sponsor and they weren't already present in their sister series? I mean, you have to imagine if, say, Superbike was still owned by Infront or the Flamini Group, then maybe there would be a more concerted effort to get in sort of from BMW on the MotoGP grid. I think it'd be fascinating to see that technology there. I mean, as Dave said, it would be a financial hiding to nothing. But wow, I mean, it would be curious.
Well, BMW, don't forget, were offered the chance to take over all of Suzuki's entity for last year. So they didn't take up that opportunity, and that would have reduced an awful lot of the costs, whether that's taken in all the trucks or just pit box equipment, whatever you're looking at. And they had the opportunity to do that and didn't take it. So I don't think that there's too much more of an incentive that you can throw at them to become a MotoGP manufacturer. And then suddenly for them to then decide down the line, do you know what, we'll actually just spend all that money ourselves, would be a bit of a surprise.
My point exactly. I mean, they were offered basically a free pass. Look, here's all of your infrastructure. Go away, build a bike, and come and race it. And they would have had they were all of those Suzuki engineers who they could have been using. All of the crew, all of the team, all of the staff. They could have had it sort of as a job lot, and BMW weren't interested. They don't need to do it. If they needed to do it, they would have done it a long time ago.
Just to go back as well, Ad, what you were saying about the rider lineups as well for Superbikes, everything I've been told is it'll be Van der Mark that stays at BMW, which puts Scott Redding on the market for someone else. Scott's manager will already been looking at different options there, but it's going to be tough for Scott to actually find something that pays well. And at the end of the day, he's not going to be going back to being a Ducati rider. He's not going to, potentially may not be kept on at BMW. Yamaha probably wouldn't be that keen because they want to bring up riders through their own ranks, which is where Domi Aguilar probably becomes the favourite for Toprak seat at Yamaha. But myself and Gordo talked about it last week of where's that next potential superstar world champion coming from in Superbikes, and it's actually quite difficult to find that rider right now without looking into the MotoGP paddock for the route of bringing in someone that would do what Bautista's done. And I think that's the big challenge for everyone. But we did also see some other news, Adam, this week about the MotoGP viewing figures as well. So the introduction of the sprint for this year has had a pretty big impact on things.
Yeah, I think there's been an increase. I mean, Dorna felt buoyed enough to issue a press release. Obviously, the sprint is something they're promoting heavily in terms of, what it's bringing to the show, in terms of assets, I guess you could say. So we had a press release saying, records have surged in 2023, an increase in TV audiences by 27%, 51% on Saturdays, of course, when the sprint takes place. There's been a 40% increase in fans, but this is all on the back of what's happened in Le Mans, where there was, as we said in the last podcast, an amazing attendance. Fair play. It's good to see. There's been a lot of conjecture about whether MotoGP is actually in crisis and, it's not as popular as it was. And I'd say we are definitely in the post-Valentino Rossi, Maya is the wrong word, but definitely within the throes of trying to rediscover a little bit of identity within MotoGP. I mean, for me, it's quite interesting. We're definitely in an Italian era with Ducati and their sort of prevalence on the grid. And of course, with Pecco Bagnaia being world champion. But, I think, there's a concerted effort to make noise that MotoGP is actually still pretty popular, guys.
Yeah, the press release was interesting because there was no baselines given. They say that there was a 27% increase on weekend TV audiences and a 51% increase on Saturdays. They don't say which year they're comparing it to, whether they're comparing it to last year. We don't know what the figures were for last year, how the figures were sort of compared to the past. We don't know if this is an average of the 10, if this 27% increase is an average for the 10 against an average for the past 10 years, or just last year, or whether last year was a good year or a bad year for TV audiences. So it's a bit to put it into context is difficult. However, I think it is encouraging that there are, that the figures audiences are increasing, that there is increased interest in it. As you say, it's a Ducati era, and it's going to be really interesting to see whether that translates to a much bigger crowd at Mugello than we saw last year.
Yeah, it's a Ducati era, and we're just about to take a break on the Paddock Pass podcast. And when we come back after the break, we'll hear from Ducati CEO Claudio Domenicali.
Renthal street chain and sprockets are perfectly matched for maximum power transfer and efficiency. From racetrack to daily rider, with over 800 fitments, Renthal Street has a final drive solution for almost any bike. Use renthal.com to find the correct fitment.
Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast, brought to you by Renthal Street. Adam, you've obviously had the chance to go over to Bologna to sit down with Domenicali, but what was the situation like over in Italy?
First of all, Steve, it's great to have Claudio on the podcast because we were told, he doesn't do many one-to-ones. They're quite infrequent. I mean, we've seen him pop up at races, of course, both Superbike and MotoGP, and last year was, of course, a milestone for Ducati in terms of their achievements on track. But, he doesn't really do many interviews. So Dave and I were able to prepare a list of questions, about Ducati as a company, as a brand, also their racing efforts. And we saved this interview, one, because there's a bit of a break in the calendar, and two, because MotoE just launched, the weekend before last in Le Mans. So that was also one of the subjects that we wanted to talk to him about. And for me, it was... I've done the Ducati factory tour before, and it's always a little bit of a surprise to see how archaic, the facility is there in Borgo Panigale. It's in a structure that was bombed in the war and rebuilt in 1946, and it's always fascinating seeing the assembly lines. They kind of churn out 200 bikes a day, up to 300, like in high season. And it was actually surprising that the tour guide that we had inside the factory, in the engine department, 85% of the staff they have there are women. And the reason for that, and I quote, is that they have better attention to detail than men, which I think is something, the four of us already knew. But to see it so starkly displayed in a productive sense was a little humbling. Dave and I then sort of, after the interview with Claudio, we were guided towards the Ducati Museum. As Dave has already said on the podcast, that was fascinating. And we were kind of entertained, Dave, weren't we, by Livio Lodi, who's like a 57-year-old historian for the brand, a guy who's been sort of implicated with Ducati since he was a young man. And he seemed to be very much like a living encyclopedia when it comes to, the whole Ducati range. And it's a small space there, but, and it's also curious that it's, Ducati didn't build a sports bike until 1955, and then now look where they are. But, Domenicali himself is a little bit part of the furniture and institution. I mean, he's been at Ducati for 3 decades, and he spent the last 10 years as CEO. So he's a man who clearly knows a lot about the passion and a lot about the essence of Ducati. And it was a good experience. We went into the offices, didn't we, Dave? And we were kind of shepherded into one room that was all locked off because they had substantial rainfall, and it had actually come through the roof and was leaking into the offices of some of the personnel. So that was, it goes to show that behind some of the most exotic and modern motorcycling technology, there's often an unexpected behind-the-scenes scenario.
Yeah, I mean, all of the because the production lines. I mean, like there was a lot of quite modern equipment there as well. They put their money where it matters. So, for example, the restaurant, because the restaurant was very good as well. But also the production line, all that sort of stuff. The stuff for all of the equipment for actually checking the machinery, which was. To make sure that it's all working, to make sure that the bikes actually, don't have any problems after they're fully assembled. They go through a complete check, and that was really interesting. Livio Lodi, the museum curator, is fascinating, not just because. I mean, when he's giving the history of Ducati, he sort of like starts off almost sort of at the beginning of the 20th century, giving you a history of the area, the region, Emilia-Romagna, because it's the centre of engineering and engineering excellence, and explaining how it all came around, which was fascinating. And I have a bit of a personal connection especially to Bologna, because that's the birthplace of Guglielmo Marconi. And my grandfather worked for Marconi, and in Chelmsford in the UK, and my dad did an apprenticeship at Marconi, and that's where he met my mother. And so, like, literally, without Bologna, I would not exist. Without Marconi, I would not exist. So you can blame an Italian for me.
Yeah, we certainly do, Dave, and they blame you for your lack of faith in tiramisu, but they do like your love of a coffee without milk throughout the course of the afternoon. So you kind of get a little bit of a comeback from them on that. But it's a great interview. It was great to get the opportunity, like Adam says, for us to sit down with Claudio and to hear his thoughts. So we'll play out the show with Ducati CEO Claudio Domenicali.
Claudio, we're here in your meeting room, surrounded by photography of Ducati icons, famous people, and of course this building, this brand is pretty immense. It's known worldwide. You've been here 30 years now, and the guys have told me it's 10 years as CEO. Can you just explain, maybe pick one of your biggest achievements from this period? What are you most proud of?
Actually, it's a complicated and complex question. If I have just to pick one, I think is the achievement of having Ducati to grow and to be becoming something really of a dimension that is very relevant, above 1 billion euro turnover. It starts to be a big company in this world without losing the core values. And so the core values of style, sophistication, performance, the passion for racing being so relevant, and so it's in my opinion an achievement, because when you grow, and then when actually also the shareholder is interested in proper profitability of the company, it's possible that you lose a little bit or even very much the focus, and so we did not. And also in the model range, we're able to expand the model range a lot without losing the character of a Ducati. So kind of rounding, smoothing, polishing. So now the bike are generally much easier, much smoother. It was super nice talking with Alex Marquez at the end of the race in Portimao, and find out, in his opinion, how much our bike is easier to ride, smoother, which actually is kind of the opposite of what we were 20 years ago. In actually difficult bike to ride, and so now this I think is an important achievement.
David and I were both in Madonna di Campiglio. I hope I pronounced that right.
It's almost okay.
Almost okay.
Madonna di Campiglio.
Okay. Right. I'll hopefully next year I'll have it. It was good to see you celebrate, what the brand have achieved on the track. But then, of course, having, reaching the 1 billion turnover point is another significant milestone for Ducati. I just wondered, with this growth and success, how difficult was that when we know in an international landscape in the world at the moment with supply lines and production costs, transportation costs, how difficult was that to achieve?
Yeah, it was a kind of a roller coaster, I would say, last year, because it's we had an incredible demand. Product, the model range had never been so strong, and so the recognition of the progress we have made and the product we have developed were very clear. And on the other side, we've never been in such a kind of complicated situation with logistics and manufacture of many components, semiconductor being first one, the major one, but even much more easier stuff like forged aluminum or steel tanks. We say for some month in a very complicated situation in doing steel tanks, because just the boats with steel and special steel sometimes come from Japan. Actually, it took twice the time it was normally needed. So it required a lot of capability of quickly change direction on a daily basis, quickly reschedule production, quickly find a new warehouse in order to store motorcycle. And being the company very solid, we kept manufacturing the bike, even if it was not possible to sell them, because it were not complete by missing a dashboard or an ECU. And so we arrived to store more than 9,000 motorcycles, which is a huge amount. But that gave us the possibility, as soon as the component arrived, to quickly put them in the market. And so our client, they had to wait, but they had to wait much less that if just postpone production, because if postpone production, you lose the slot in the factory, then it's not easy to recover. While if you have the bike in a warehouse, it's much easier. You go there, you pick up the bike, and you fit the new dashboard, and then you sell it. So it was, in terms of working capital and the capital invested, was a big investment, and we are still recovering from that. But we are able to release the pain as much as possible on the client, and of course also to make a very good year in terms of final sales result.
Thinking globally, how difficult is it to plan ahead or plan long term? Because you have emerging. What is your view of emerging markets? Production in India, Asia. I mean, it seems world economies are shifting quite quickly all the time. You may plan something big for South America and it doesn't quite come off. How difficult is it to balance all of that?
Actually, I think it's the most important part of the CEO job, actually, to look forward and to try to define what will be the future in 5 years, what will be in 10 years, what will be in 20 years, which actually, of course, is a kind of gamble. And it's a little bit like the crystal ball. But on the other part, is what is needed to properly take direction. I'm trying to listen as much as possible, learn as much as possible, travel, talk with people. I have a very nice network of people. Network, I think, is one of the most crucial parts, because actually you exchange idea, information, opinions, and then you try to kind of get feedback. And of course, we are a company based in Italy, but we are a very global company. We sell worldwide, and we have actually our national sales company in 15 countries around the world. And so it's very important to understand what China will do in the future. You name India. And of course, it's very complicated, because we live in a very complicated world. And to understand what will happen in 10 years, or to actually to have a clear opinion. It's you can have an opinion, but to fix it is almost impossible. So things are changing quite quickly. So again, I think what it's making the difference is to be able to quickly change direction, to be nimble. So try to be lean as a factory, try to actually be efficient and to generate resource, so to be profitable as a company in order to reinvest in different sector, not just not to put all the eggs in one basket. And that makes the company more resilient because will be electrical bike come really, will be e-fuel, will be hydrogen. That is, for example, one of the big discussion, but you see even how much has been changed in the last 3 weeks in Europe. Actually, it was already like a decision made. IC engine just cut in 2035, and then actually now it's still the same, but with a but. So e-fuel are into the equation now, so everything is fully carbon neutral, is being considered proper, and so that means that internal combustion engine will not die. Then it's a matter of how much will be the price of e-fuel and so on. But it's a big change, and you need to be prepared for that. And so this is how I interpreted my role here as a CEO.
Yeah, because how can you plan around government legislation if it's changing, year to year or with a 5-year prospect?
And in a period when everything is changing, we seem to be in the middle of like an energy revolution almost, where we're switching from carbon fuels to carbon neutral fuels, and no one really knows what the future will be.
So the human being, we are a little bit philosophical here, but looks like a little bit crazy, And if you are passionate like I am about numbers, and you kind of draw lines, not in years, but in centuries, is a little bit crazy and bizarre what happened in the last 200 years. And so we live in a moment which is, I don't think there is it's specific. It's just continuously accelerating. So the slope of the lines, which actually either being the number of people living in the earth, or the total energy consumption, or total water consumption, it's just increasing the slope constantly. And that put a number of big element on the table. And so now everyone is focused on the decarbonization of mobility, but that's just one of the big topics, And so, of course, we are into manufacture of goods that use fossil fuel. So we have to take care of that part. But there are a lot of other contributors, very big, with actually being, for example, production of food, which actually different foods are different, immense in terms of producing CO2,
Yeah.
So, but that takes us very, very far,
Claudio, in Modena, in the celebration of the MotoGP and World Superbike champions, we saw a heavy presence from Audi.
Yeah.
Could you just explain to listeners or to readers, how is the company standing in the Audi group? Do you have to answer to people, or is it quite flexible there? How does it work?
It's a very interesting example of controlling a company while giving the company a lot of freedom with a lot of control, which actually seems counterintuitive, because I think they are very smart in actually helping us in getting more and more structure, so in getting the company more and more solid. Actually, not only in the finance part, but all the compliance stuff. Everything is about rules and procedures. So the company is getting more and more solid through the years, while leaving our interaction with clients as free as possible, with the totally 100% Italian flavor. And so which product we make, why we make that product, how we relate with clients, this very friendly, almost family approach that make the Ducatisti so happy to stay with us, it's still completely in place. And so, of course, it's sometimes complicated because this solid part It's about using also processes that are sometimes thought for a much bigger company. And so you get some slowdown in some part. But of course, you are slowing down by being more robust. And so it's the price you have to pay in order to be more solid. Where we actually, we are really continue doing good, it's in the product development, racing, and all the marketing part. It's complete independent. And of course, we align on the vision. And so we align very clearly on the vision of the company. And so they are not, of course, Ducati is a very minor contributor on the finance part of the VW group, And so it's most important for them that actually we make the brand shine and shining even more in the future. And if possible, to make the shiniest brand between all brands of two wheels. This is our final goal, which means that we are not focused on actually increasing volume too much. We want to have this as much as possible one-to-one relationship with our clients and have with us everyone that actually is a real connoisseur and actually love to buy special things and so appreciate when we use special materials, special technology, and then of course it's differentiating the range because a Monster may be a more standard motorcycle than a Superleggera, of course, and so we have different, let's say,
the products to appeal to different people.
Yes.
It's because you mentioned marketing and another facet in Madonna. In your speech, you mentioned that Ducati is a brand that inspires passion and love amongst its fans. I mean, even myself as a young boy, to wear a red T-shirt with that logo was quite special, quite exotic. I just wondered now how you feel about marketing the brand. Is it in a generation where things are changing quickly, how people absorb media, how you can get the message of the brand out if you're still aiming for a premium style image? How important is marketing now to Ducati?
Yeah, it's dramatically important, and I'm a very big fan of marketing. I mean, the good marketing. So forget what was happening 30 years ago, in which actually whoever was producing a washing machine powder was making a lot of publicity saying that this powder was the best one, and it was not very relevant if it was or not, So you just were doing a lot of pressure on TV, and that was mainly the media, and that was the way of doing. The current time, everything is very transparent. There has been a lot of power moved from the brands to the consumer and to the clients because actually they buy the product, they use it, and then they give their opinion on that very openly on the web. And so either it is Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. There is no way to make a bad product and to support with marketing. So because actually marketing is what the client do themselves. And so this is where we are so focused on actually creating what we call brand promoter. And so to stay in contact with all our clients and to understand what is their opinion. And actually, we measure constantly their willingness to recommend our product. And we are working on improving the product as much as possible, connecting with them, making them part of the experience, and actually being them our promoter. And so our marketing expert, because nothing better than a happy customer is really credible. And there is no way actually that if you have an unhappy customer to stop in telling on the web. And so you will have, of course, always some unhappy because it's impossible that you make 100%. But actually, if you move from having 80% happy and 20 unhappy to 95 happy and 5% unhappy, of course, your marketing possibility grow a lot. And then for us now, marketing is this making the people feel special. So creating events, attracting them, and feeling that they are into, if you want, as a part of a club, that care about special motorcycle. But the motorcycle is only at the center of the global world, which is made by racing, made by the company, the museum, the riding schools, and all of that done with this idea of doing it a bit a little bit better than average, let's put it this way. So our ambition to raise the experience.
One of the biggest promoters of your brand has been Gigi Dall'Igna, because he's managed to, finally win another world championship and all the rest of it. What was your role in recruiting him? How important has he been to the success of Ducati? And what's his strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, I mean, I became managing director kind of 10 years ago, and when I became the head of the company, racing was in a very poor difficult situation. Yeah. It was just the end of the Valentino Rossi period here, and actually he left the company, and the team was very down, and also the technical part was at the end of a period in which they tried many different things, and so they even lost the idea, and so when I came, I'm coming from racing, so it was very difficult for me to see that situation. But in the last period, before becoming managing director, racing had a complete different management. I was kept out for 3 years, and so I missed completely the last 3 years of that part, and so I had almost very clear what needed to be done in order to fix it, and so having one clear leader was the first most important one. And so I look around, and there were not many available, and so this is why we met a couple of times with Gigi. We did not need to make many meetings, and then we find an agreement, and then Gigi started with us end of 2013. And then it took a while, because actually you have to recover from scratch. He was very clever, because he understood immediately that there were a lot of good people here, but without a clear direction. And so he took only one person from his previous job, and he was able to make all the people that were here working properly. And actually, most of the people that actually won the first title are still here, and have been evaluated by Gigi. So I think that this has been a very important value of Gigi. The other one is to have a clear idea of what to do. He's a very clear leader, clear direction. And then, as all of us, as also himself some negative, which actually is a little bit part of you cannot have the positive without the negative. So it's sometimes a bit difficult to work, because it's very opinionated. So if you have a different opinion, actually it's a kind of a bit more complicated. But this is part of the thing, and we work quite well in this year, and we are able also to continuously take together the most important decision, and to guide the team in the proper direction.
Why does Ducati go racing? What? Obviously, it's a massive marketing branding, because Ducati is, racing is central to Ducati. But what kind of technologies what kind of things are you learning from racing in MotoGP, racing in World Superbikes? What kind of technologies are being transferred into the bikes you actually sell?
The big advantage of MotoGP compared to Formula One is that the bike is reasonably similar to what you sell, while the Formula One car is completely another thing. So there is a lot that we can learn and carry on. The Panigale is the perfect example. The engine of the Panigale is a very close interpretation of the core principle of the engine of the MotoGP we did in 2015. That was the first bike that actually Gigi Dall'Igna thought as a global project. The counter-rotating crankshaft, you name one, was part of that. The whole layout with the cylinder, the general frame layout and dimension. So there is a lot, and we learn a lot in MotoGP how to make a bike to behave in an easy way, which seems a little bit strange because you say MotoGP is very complicated and difficult, but the more you are into racing and the more you learn that putting a rider at ease and stress him as less as possible is very relevant. And you said before that actually Pecco looked like he was playing with a bike, and this is when you reach the perfect state, on which the rider confidence is so high, and the effort you need to put in riding is not dramatic. And so he's kind of being able to change direction pretty quickly. He's able to turn in where he wants. The engine is not aggressive, and it does not put the whole chassis into problem. And this have been a lot of this concept transferring to production motorcycle. And so the current Panigale Model Year 23, it's far easier to ride on the racetrack than a bike of just 6, 7, 8 years ago. For everything we've learned there, electronic, take the traction control. All the traction control of the Panigale derived from the software we developed in MotoGP when it was the open software, which actually now we cannot do anymore, and that's a limitation. It's always a fine balance between leaving the championship open in order to develop technology or try to control the cost. But the whole traction control that you buy now in a Panigale, we give to the ECU manufacturer, that is the engine management system, but we give them as a kind of a black box. So it's our own code that we code, and then when it's compiled, they just need to give input and output. So we have all the knowledge of the strategy.
Speaking of from going from racing to production, obviously we have MotoE. I was at the presentation of the MotoE in Modena last year, which was fascinating. You talked about the different engines for the future, zero carbon fuels, what you were saying earlier, electronic or electric bikes. How do you see MotoE? Are we going to see road bikes coming from this? Do you see it as a development platform for production? And how do you think that electric bikes are the future, or do you think it's going to be more open?
We do MotoE basically because we want really to understand what are the options, what is the potential, which are the limits of a full electrical motorcycle with the current technology, and with the technology will be available in 5 years, and with technology will be available in 10 years. We still consider that as a kind of a learning laboratory, development of understanding and develop skill, because it's very difficult to talk just making a generic statement, And so in order to understand what would be the value of an electrical motorcycle to give to a final client, you need to try to develop it and to push the boundary. And so to try to understand in the world what are the best battery, what then are the problem, how we need to cool the battery, can we make it air cooled, do we need to make liquid cooled, how is the engine, do we make the engine water cooled, do we make oil cooling, so there are a lot of options, and it's fascinating because it's the jumps. Now we have the bike that we supply to the rider for this championship that actually has just been tested in Jerez. But we are already thinking the next generation. And next generation is already a big jump because it's different from the internal combustion engine, which is very refined technology. And 1 year from the other, you just polish it, So while there are big jumps. On the other side, the chemistry of the battery, it's with the lithium, it's kind of getting close to a certain limit. So it's now talking about solid-state battery, which have very interesting potential. And so this is very helpful being part of the group because we are in contact with it's called Center of Excellence of VW in Salzgitter. And actually, we make meeting with them. Our technical people make meeting with them. And this Center of Excellence is in contact because VW Group is shareholder of QuantumScape, which is one US company, which actually they are developing this solid-state battery technology. So, and we are discussing if we can then use for the MotoE, and so there it's an interesting increase of energy density, which actually is still the main problem of the battery today, which energy density is not fantastic, and so the weight of the motorcycle have to be a compromise between a certain range. So either you limit the range too much or you increase the weight, so it's a little bit of a compromise.
One of the problems which motorcycling has in general is that motorcyclists are getting older. Do you see racing as a way to attract younger people into motorcycling? Or does that have to come from a different direction? I mean, look, we need young motorcyclists to take over from old motorcyclists like me.
So, again, another big problem, because motorcyclist is getting older for two reasons. One of which is a bit difficult to manage, because if you take a European country, most of the European country have the population which is getting older. So we are just missing kids. Then if you can take a percentage of the existing kids, but if the kids are not existing, it's kind of complicated, not just for motorcycle, but for everyone, and it really takes actually to move into different geography, and so US, China, where actually this situation is different. And so it's important to expand this also out of Europe, which mainly for big motorcycle used to be the center. Racing is very relevant on that, and we have quite a number of activities together with Dorna in order to increase the ability to talk with young people. And it's an ongoing process. In Portimao, there were a lot of things new, which actually is part of getting the sport more open in a way, On Italy, it was the first sprint race. It was live on YouTube to give us something tangible, and actually to be present on the media, which is actually more achievable for young people. And Formula One is already doing a lot on that, and is getting good result. So there are young people. Women is the other part, which actually we would love to actually talk in a more direct way. And so even there are action to be made. But not only so racing, yes, but also we will see products in the next 2-3 years in our model range, which are especially focused on younger people, in order to attract them into the brand, and then to be possible to make them grow into the brand.
Claudio, just two more questions. KTM, are Europeans' biggest manufacturers, and they have a split between street bike and off-road. We saw Ducati present the Desert X. We hear about interest in dirt bikes and MXGP. What is this about for the company? Is this just about diversifying the product range even more?
Yes, and the Desert X, you name it, it's something we never did before. This enduro bike, very capable, going off-road, long distance, and we will do more in this direction, which is something that for sure attract younger people, people more passionate about really proving also themselves physically, and gives the use of this motorcycle a lot of reward, also going off-road. So for sure that is part of our strategy in the future.
Lastly, do you see Ducati now in 2023 as a brand that takes pride in styling still, or more innovation? Because it seems like you guys are more proactive of what you're giving the consumer.
Oh yeah, we are not deciding between the two, because we see ourselves, we define ourselves this kind of we call it magical combination between style and technology, and so. This is Ducati, so it's a very nice looking motorcycle, very polished, refined, a very long time thought about the balance of the volume of the motorcycle, because we look at that not just as a motorcycle, but as a kind of a piece of art. But on the same time, we want to be at the forefront of technology. And so this is why we invest so much. Racing is part of that, but also out of that. And we think it's a very nice positioning for the future, because there is a growing number of people that can take advantage of having a better status, a better actually spending potential worldwide. And the more you have spending potential, the more normally you care about nice thing. Okay, so either it's art or it's home furniture or it is cars, and so also these people appreciate motorcycles that are not just standard. Okay, so we want to be very far from the standard. And on the other side, we think that when you buy a Ducati, you should actually be surprised by how easy it is to be emotional and how safe it is. And you can only get that through technology. Otherwise, you cannot have a performance motorcycle which is easy to ride. It's a kind of an impossible compromise. But you can solve that with technology. Either is adjustable suspension, traction control, cornering ABS, the radar, all of that make possible that actually you ride the Panigale on the track, 220 horsepower, but in a very safe way, you know.
Claudio, thank you ever so much for your time. Best of luck on the track, both series this year. Actually.
Yeah. You've got. It's going to be well. You can't improve. You can only match your achievement.
Yeah, but it would be nice, you know. So we are. Let's say let's try hard to match the achievement.
Yeah, off to a good start anyway. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Grazie.
Grazie.